The dark psychology of silence begins in moments most people overlook: a pause in conversation, an unanswered message, a look that lingers just a second longer than expected. Silence is often mistaken for emptiness, but psychologically, it is rarely empty. It is a space, and human beings instinctively rush to fill space. That instinct is where silence gains its power. From an early age, we are conditioned to talk, to explain ourselves, to justify our emotions, to prove that we are friendly, safe, cooperative. Silence disrupts that pattern. When someone remains quiet in a moment where speech is expected, it creates uncertainty. The mind does not tolerate uncertainty easily. It searches for meaning, and when none is given, it invents one. Often, the meaning it invents is more revealing than any words could have been. When two people interact, there is an invisible negotiation happening beneath the surface. Who speaks first? Who speaks more? Who explains themselves? Who waits? Silence subtly shifts this negotiation. The person who remains silent forfeits immediate clarity but gains psychological leverage. The longer the silence lasts, the more the other person begins to fill it with their own fears, assumptions, and insecurities. Silence creates asymmetry. One mind is exposed, the other remains concealed. The silent person becomes a mirror. Whatever the other person feels, nervousness, guilt, attraction, impatience, reflects back at them without correction. This reflection can feel deeply uncomfortable because it removes the usual cues people rely on to orient themselves socially. Without feedback, the mind spirals inward. In conversations, silence often forces people to reveal more than they intended. The moment someone finishes speaking and is met with quiet instead of reassurance, they feel compelled to continue. They add details, they soften statements, they over-explain. Each added word is not for the listener, but for their own discomfort. Silence turns the speaker into both the actor and the audience, self-editing in real time. This effect is especially potent in emotional situations. When someone seeks validation, reassurance, or forgiveness, silence feels threatening. It suggests judgment, indifference, or control. The silent person does not need to accuse or confront. Their quiet presence allows the other person to do that work internally. Guilt, uncertainty, and anxiety rush in to occupy the space where words would normally protect the ego. In relationships, silence can be intoxicating or destabilizing. Emotional availability is often measured by responsiveness. When that responsiveness disappears, attachment systems activate. The mind begins to fixate. Questions multiply. What did I do wrong? Have I lost them? Do they care less than I do? Silence does not answer these questions, and that absence of answers makes them grow louder. Interestingly, silence often increases perceived value. People tend to assign depth and authority to what they cannot easily access. A person who speaks less is often seen as more deliberate, more self-controlled, more powerful. Their words, when they do arrive, carry weight. This is not because silence itself is virtuous, but because restraint signals choice. It implies that speech is optional, not compulsive. In contrast, constant speech can signal neediness or anxiety. When someone fills every gap, responds instantly, and explains excessively, they reveal their dependence on being understood and accepted. Silence, by comparison, suggests independence. It communicates, without saying so, that the silent individual is comfortable not being fully known. This is why silence can feel threatening in group settings. A quiet person draws attention simply by not participating. Others may project intent onto them. Are they judging, disengaged, superior, unfriendly? The group attempts to resolve this ambiguity through assumptions. Silence disrupts the social equilibrium and forces others to confront their own discomfort with not being in control of how they are perceived. Silence is also a tool of dominance when used deliberately. In negotiations, interrogations, or disagreements, the person who can tolerate silence the longest often gains the upper hand. While the other person speaks to regain comfort, they reveal priorities, weaknesses, and emotional triggers. Silence becomes a filter, allowing information to pass through unchecked. However, the power of silence does not come from coldness alone. It comes from emotional discipline. Uncontrolled silence, withdrawal driven by fear or avoidance, often communicates insecurity. Controlled silence, on the other hand, is calm and intentional. It is the difference between retreating and standing still. One seeks escape, the other invites reaction. Many people fear silence because it removes their ability to manage others' perceptions. Words allow correction. Silence offers no such safety. It leaves others free to interpret. For those who rely heavily on approval, this freedom feels dangerous. For those who are self-anchored, it feels natural. The dark side of silence emerges when it is weaponized without awareness of its impact. Prolonged emotional withdrawal can destabilize others, particularly those with anxious attachment styles. Silence can punish without appearing aggressive. It can deny closure. It can maintain control while avoiding responsibility. This is why silence is so often underestimated. It leaves no visible evidence, only psychological residue. Yet silence is not inherently manipulative. It is neutral. Its effect depends on intention and context. Silence after reflection invites depth. Silence during conflict can either de-escalate or dominate. Silence in response to disrespect can signal boundaries. Silence in place of communication can erode trust. The same absence can heal or harm. What makes silence so powerful is that it forces awareness. It removes distraction. It directs attention inward. People learn more about themselves in moments of silence than in moments of explanation. The discomfort it produces is often not about the person being silent, but about what the mind uncovers when nothing external distracts it. In a world saturated with noise, silence stands out. It feels unnatural. That is precisely why it commands presence. To be silent is to resist the urge to soothe, to justify, to fill, to perform. It is to allow tension to exist without resolution. Most people cannot do this for long. Those who can are often perceived as controlled, mysterious, or intimidating, not because they are hiding something, but because they are not revealing it cheaply. Silence, when used deliberately, communicates that attention must be earned, not demanded. And in that subtle shift, power quietly changes hands. Silence often reveals the difference between strength and fragility more clearly than speech ever could. When words stop, habits surface. Some people grow restless, tapping fingers, shifting posture, searching for escape. Others become talkative, throwing thoughts into the void in hopes that something will land and dissolve the unease. And a rare few remain still, grounded, simply present. These reactions are not random. They are expressions of how each person relates to control. Control is not always about directing others. Often, it is about regulating oneself. Silence demands internal regulation. Without words, there is nothing to hide behind. No clever phrasing. No emotional deflection. Just awareness. This is why silence is so uncomfortable for people who are internally chaotic. The absence of noise amplifies what they try to suppress. In social interactions, silence can subtly reverse dependency. The one who needs reassurance feels exposed when reassurance does not come. Over time, this can create a quiet imbalance. Attention shifts toward the silent individual. Their reactions are watched closely. Their approval becomes more valuable precisely because it is not freely given. People begin to measure their own worth through the responses they receive or don't receive. This dynamic shows up frequently in attraction. When someone withdraws verbal affirmation while maintaining calm presence, it creates confusion. The other person feels uncertainty mixed with curiosity. The mind fixates on unresolved feedback loops. Silence becomes a question mark, and humans are deeply compelled to answer questions, even imaginary ones. The desire to resolve ambiguity often masquerades as attraction. Silence also protects. It prevents unnecessary exposure. Every spoken word reveals values, emotions, intentions. Silence conceals not out of fear, but out of selectivity. It creates distance between impulse and expression. In that distance, clarity can form. People who speak less are often thought to think more, even when they simply think before speaking. That perception alone shapes how they are treated. In confrontational situations, silence disrupts escalation. Anger feeds on reaction. Volume invites volume. Accusations pull counter-accusations into the open. Silence removes fuel. It refuses to mirror chaos. This refusal can frustrate others, but it also destabilizes their emotional momentum. Without resistance, there is nothing to push against. At the same time, silence places responsibility where it belongs. It forces others to sit with their words. When no immediate response arrives, they must reflect on what was said. The echo of their own voice becomes louder than any reply. This can lead to self-awareness or discomfort, depending on the person's maturity. There is also a moral dimension to silence that is rarely discussed. Remaining quiet does not always mean agreement, but it is often interpreted as such. This ambiguity grants power but also demands discernment. Silence should be chosen, not defaulted to. Avoidance dressed as restraint eventually erodes credibility. Yet, when silence is paired with composure and intention, it can communicate boundaries more clearly than confrontation. It signals that certain behaviors do not warrant engagement. Not everything deserves a response. Not every provocation requires energy. Silence filters the meaningful from the trivial. On a deeper level, silence alters how time is perceived. Conversations slow down, reactions lose urgency. This shift in tempo alone can change outcomes. Rushed speech often reveals desperation. Measured silence suggests patience, and patience, psychologically, is often equated with power. This is why silence is common among leaders, observers, and those who move deliberately. They are not detached from emotion, they are selective with expression. They understand that words are irreversible, but silence can always be broken. Until then, it remains a strategic reserve. Silence also challenges the modern need for constant visibility. In an attention-driven world, remaining unreactive feels almost defiant. It resists the pressure to perform, explain, and curate a response. This resistance carries weight. It signals autonomy in a system designed to elicit reaction. However, silence should not be confused with emotional absence. The most effective silence is not empty. It is attentive. It listens fully. It observes without interruption. People feel this difference intuitively. Calm silence invites honesty. Cold silence repels it. The same lack of words can either open or close a door. For individuals who master silence, conversations become less about being heard and more about understanding. They speak when it adds value, not when it fills space. Over time, others adapt to this rhythm. They pause. They choose words more carefully. The tone of interaction shifts. Ultimately, the dark psychology of silence lies in its invisibility. There are no overt moves to point to, no statements to quote, no clear intentions to contest. Its influence operates beneath awareness, shaping emotions without announcing itself. Silence leaves room for projection, and projection reveals truth. What people see in silence often reflects what they fear, desire, or avoid. And that is why silence feels so powerful. It does not impose meaning. It allows meaning to surface on its own. In that stillness, people confront themselves, and for many, that is far more unsettling than any spoken confrontation could ever be. Silence also reshapes memory. Conversations filled with words blur together over time, but moments of silence tend to stand out. People remember how they felt when nothing was said. That feeling becomes attached to the person who remained quiet. Whether it was calm, tension, admiration, or unease, silence leaves an emotional imprint stronger than explanation ever could. When someone controls silence, they often control pacing. They decide when interaction begins and when it ends. This pacing subtly positions them as the reference point. Others adjust around it. They wait. They anticipate. Over time, this creates a quiet hierarchy, not one enforced through authority, but one shaped through emotional gravity. Silence can also expose truth more effectively than interrogation. When questions are followed by space instead of reassurance, people instinctively fill that space with honesty or defense. Both reveal something real. The mind rushes to resolve discomfort, and truth often surfaces alongside it, unpolished and unfiltered. There is a reason confessions often emerge after long pauses. Silence removes distraction and allows thoughts to settle. In that settling, clarity arises. People hear themselves more clearly when no one interrupts their internal dialogue. Silence gives their thoughts room to become audible. In relationships, silence can function as a boundary that words fail to establish. Explaining boundaries often invites debate. Silence ends it. When engagement stops, patterns are disrupted. Those accustomed to provoking reaction lose leverage. The absence of response denies the feedback loop they rely on. But silence is not passive. It requires self-control. Reactivity is easy. Silence demands restraint. To remain quiet when provoked means tolerating internal discomfort without external discharge. This tolerance is what most people lack. They mistake emotional release for resolution. Silence chooses endurance instead. Over time, this endurance reshapes identity. Individuals who practice silence regularly become less dependent on validation. They no longer need immediate acknowledgement to feel secure. This independence subtly shifts how others interact with them. Requests become more respectful. Words become more measured. Silence also collapses false urgency. Many conflicts rely on speed, quick replies, heated reactions, escalation before reflection. Silence slows the process. It introduces pause, and in that pause, emotional intensity often dissolves on its own. There is a paradox here. Silence can feel like distance, yet it can also create intimacy. When two people share quiet without tension, it signals safety. No performance required, no pressure to entertain or impress, just presence. This kind of silence builds trust more deeply than constant conversation. However, silence without presence feels hollow. Absence disguised as restraint creates confusion rather than calm. This is why intent matters. Silence that listens is different from silence that avoids. One invites connection, the other withdraws from it. In power dynamics, silence becomes most effective when paired with consistency. Inconsistent silence feels like punishment. Consistent silence feels like policy. It defines what is acceptable without explanation. People learn quickly when patterns remain stable. Silence also resists manipulation. When someone seeks to provoke guilt, fear, or urgency, silence blocks the emotional exchange they depend on. Without reaction, their strategy collapses. They are forced to confront their own tactics instead of feeding off response. Yet silence should be wielded with awareness. Its effects linger. Unanswered moments stay unresolved in the mind. Prolonged silence can fracture understanding, if not eventually grounded in clarity. Silence initiates processes, but meaning still needs orientation. The most powerful use of silence is not permanent withdrawal, but controlled pause followed by deliberate speech. When words finally arrive after silence, they land differently. They are received with attention, weighted by anticipation, elevated by scarcity. This is why silence should not be feared but respected. It is not absence, it is space, and space is where influence operates quietly. In silence, people reveal how they cope with not being in control. Some rush to fix, some deflect, some unravel, and some remain steady. Those who remain steady rarely need to announce their strength. It is felt in the calm way they allow silence to exist without tension, and often that calm speaks louder than anything they could have said. As silence extends, it begins to expose something deeper than social habits. It reveals one's relationship with self. When words fall away, distractions dissolve. What remains is internal dialogue. For many, that dialogue is loud, fragmented, restless. Silence does not create this noise. It simply removes what was masking it. This is why silence feels threatening to those who constantly occupy themselves with stimulation. Music, conversation, notifications, movement. These are not always pleasures, but shields. Silence dismantles those shields. In its presence, unresolved thoughts rise to the surface. Regrets, desires, doubts. Silence is not cruel, but it is honest. The individuals who are most at ease with silence tend to have internal coherence. Their thoughts are not constantly at war with themselves. They do not need constant external confirmation to feel intact. This internal stability radiates outward, shaping how others respond to them. People sense it without understanding why. Silence changes perception of intelligence as well. Rapid speech is often mistaken for competence. Silence disrupts this illusion. When someone pauses before responding, it signals consideration. Even when their eventual words are simple, they are perceived as deliberate. Over time, silence creates the impression of depth, whether or not depth was intended. This perception alters group dynamics. In meetings, the silent individual becomes a reference point. When they finally speak, attention sharpens, conversations recalibrate. Others measure their own opinions against the response they anticipate or appear to receive. Silence reshapes influence not by volume, but by gravity. There is also an evolutionary undercurrent to silence. In unfamiliar situations, humans instinctively scan for cues. The one who remains still and observant appears less reactive, more aware. In ancient contexts, this could mean safety. That instinct lingers. Silence subconsciously signals alertness rather than vulnerability. In conflict, silence challenges emotional narratives. Accusations seek acknowledgement. Defensiveness feeds escalation. Silence denies both. It creates a vacuum where emotional momentum collapses under its own weight. Without reaction, the story loses direction. Yet silence should never replace integrity. Withholding communication to avoid accountability distorts its power. Silence used to evade truth eventually betrays itself. The body reacts, signals leak, people sense inconsistency. Genuine silence is stable, deceptive silence fractures. Silence also deepens listening. Without planning a response, attention turns outward. Subtleties emerge, tone shifts, patterns repeat. People reveal more in what they say than they realize, especially when they are given uninterrupted space. Silence becomes a lens through which truth sharpens. In emotional exchanges, silence can invite vulnerability. When someone feels genuinely heard without interruption, defenses lower. They speak from deeper layers. Silence here is not dominant, it is receptive. It creates safety by refusing to impose direction. This dual nature of silence, dominant and receptive, explains its complexity. It can control or connect. It can intimidate or soothe. The difference lies not in duration, but in presence. As silence becomes a practiced skill, it reshapes one's emotional economy. Reactions become less impulsive. Thoughts settle before expression. Decisions slow enough to gain clarity. Life feels less chaotic, not because circumstances change, but because internal processing becomes quieter. The fear of being misunderstood diminishes. Silence teaches that not everything needs explanation, that some meanings surface naturally through consistency. Over time, people respond less to words and more to patterns of presence. Silence also reveals who seeks control through noise. Those uncomfortable with quiet often rely on performance. When performance stops working, insecurity surfaces. Silence exposes this gently but firmly. It does not accuse, it waits. In intimate relationships, silence tests emotional maturity. Can two people share space without filling it? Can closeness exist without constant affirmation? Silence reveals whether connection is rooted in presence or dependency. Many conflicts dissolve when silence replaces defense. Without immediate verbal positioning, empathy has time to arise. Intent becomes clearer. Misinterpretations soften. Silence allows complexity to exist without forcing resolution. There is a quiet confidence that emerges from mastering silence. It is not arrogance. It does not need recognition. It is the calm assurance that reaction is a choice, not an obligation. This confidence alters how others approach you. They sense limits. They sense depth. They sense that engagement will be meaningful, not automatic. Ultimately, silence is a mirror. It reflects emotional intelligence more accurately than speech ever could. Those who fear it see it as emptiness. Those who understand it recognize its fullness. Silence does not remove power from interaction. It redistributes it. And those who learn to sit comfortably within it often discover that they no longer need to chase control. It arrives naturally, carried in the spaces they are no longer afraid to leave empty. As silence becomes more familiar, it begins to change not only how others respond to you, but how you relate to your own thoughts. The urge to immediately label, judge, or react starts to fade. Instead of rushing to conclusions, there is curiosity. Instead of urgency, there is observation. Silence gently rewires mental habits built on speed and noise. With time, silence sharpens perception. Small details once overlooked become obvious. Shifts in tone, slight pauses in speech, micro-expressions that reveal hesitation or confidence. In quiet, the mind becomes attuned to nuance. What once required explanation becomes visible without words. This awareness alters trust. Those who speak endlessly often reveal contradictions without noticing. Silence catches them. Patterns emerge. Consistency becomes noticeable. People show who they are not through what they say, but through what they cannot sustain when nothing is offered in return. Silence also dissolves performance anxiety. When you no longer feel compelled to fill space, you stop measuring yourself by constant output. There is relief in not having to prove worth moment by moment. Self-value becomes internal rather than negotiated. In environments driven by competition and visibility, this creates quiet advantage. Most people burn energy projecting certainty. Silence conserves energy. It lets others reveal their positions first. It allows response instead of reaction. Information accumulates while attention remains undivided. Over time, silence fosters patience. The need for immediate outcome loses its grip. You begin to tolerate processes unfolding slowly. This patience is often misread as detachment, but it is actually engagement without desperation. In arguments, silence interrupts emotional scripts. Raised voices expect resistance. Accusations demand defense. silence denies the script entirely. Without lines to respond to, the emotional scene collapses. People are left confronting their own intensity. This disruption can feel unsettling. Silence does not offer closure on demand. It asks people to reflect before resolution. Not everyone is prepared for that. Those who are not may lash out or retreat. Those who are often grow. Silence also clarifies intention. When words are removed, motives become harder to hide. You notice who reaches out to control and who reaches out to connect, who speaks to dominate, who speaks to understand. Silence reveals desire stripped of disguise. As this awareness deepens, boundaries grow clearer. You stop over-explaining. You stop negotiating self-respect. Silence becomes a natural limit. What does not align fades without confrontation. At a psychological level, silence strengthens emotional endurance. You become more capable of holding discomfort without needing relief through expression. This capacity is freedom. It means emotions no longer dictate behavior automatically. Freedom from reactivity changes how life feels. Setbacks no longer demand immediate meaning. Criticism loses urgency. Praise loses control. Silence teaches that emotions pass even when unexpressed. In relationships, silence encourages mutual responsibility. Without constant reassurance, individuals must anchor themselves. Dependency weakens. Connection becomes choice rather than need. When words are spoken, they carry intention rather than compulsion. Silence also shapes legacy. Loud moments impress briefly. Quiet consistency lasts. People forget most conversations, but they remember how someone made them feel when nothing was said. Calm, safe, unsettled, seen. This emotional residue often determines long-term influence. Silence shapes memory more than noise ever does. As awareness of silence grows, so does respect for timing. Knowing when not to speak becomes as important as knowing when to speak. This discernment refines communication rather than diminishing it. Words gain precision. Conversations slow enough to matter. Silence also nurtures self-trust. You become less dependent on external validation to confirm your perceptions. If something feels off, silence allows observation to confirm or correct instinct. You no longer rush to resolve uncertainty. You let it reveal itself. In moments of doubt, silence offers grounding. It reminds you that presence does not require performance, that worth does not require display. Being is enough before doing. This realization alters ambition. Goals become less performative. Success becomes personal rather than comparative. Silence shifts focus inward where motivations refine. As this internal alignment strengthens, others respond differently. Respect grows naturally. Conversations deepen. Superficial interactions fall away without effort. Silence filters relationships the way clarity filters intention. Ultimately, silence teaches restraint without repression, control without force, influence without display. It is not about withholding, but about choosing. Those who master silence are not empty. They are full enough to wait. And in a world constantly demanding reaction, waiting becomes the rarest form of power. Silence also reshapes how one experiences time. Without constant conversation or noise, moments stretch. Seconds feel fuller. Days slow down enough to be noticed. This altered rhythm brings clarity. What once felt urgent often reveals itself as inconsequential. Silence creates distance between impulse and action, and in that distance, perspective forms. As this perspective grows, emotional reactions soften. Not because feeling disappears, but because expression becomes intentional. You begin to feel emotions fully without needing to display them. This containment strengthens emotional intelligence. Feelings are no longer something to escape or broadcast, but something to observe and understand. Silence exposes motivation. When attention is gone, some behaviors stop. Without an audience, certain efforts lose meaning. This reveals what was driven by validation rather than purpose. Silence strips away performative identity and leaves essence behind. In conversations, silence often invites honesty faster than empathy alone. When someone senses they are not being judged or interrupted, they dig deeper. They speak truths they didn't realize they were carrying. Silence here serves as permission. This can be unsettling. People are not always prepared to confront themselves so directly. Silence becomes a trigger for introspection. Some avoid it, some resist it, and some grow within it. Silence also teaches restraint in conflict. It enables disagreement without escalation. When words are chosen carefully or withheld entirely, misunderstandings dissipate. Silence deactivates the reflex to win. It refocuses conversation on understanding. As silence becomes consistent, it shapes reputation. People begin to associate it with calm authority. Your presence alone influences the tone of interaction. This influence is subtle but enduring. It does not demand attention, it commands it quietly. There is an elegance to this restraint. It suggests confidence without arrogance, balance without rigidity. Silence, at its best, is not absence but composure expressed through stillness. Deep listening emerges naturally from this composure. You stop rehearsing what to say next. You hear what is actually being said. People sense this immediately. They feel seen rather than addressed. This sensation fosters trust. Silence also sharpens discernment. Not every thought needs voice. Not every reaction needs airing. Knowing this frees mental space. The mind becomes less cluttered. Decisions become less reactive. In leadership, silence often differentiates those who manage from those who influence. Managers speak often to assert direction. Influencers speak sparingly, letting environment and example lead. Silence here is not weak, it is strategic. The discipline of silence extends beyond speech. It shapes digital behavior. Response is slow, engagement becomes selective, attention is protected, silence becomes a choice rather than a deficit. This selectivity guards emotional energy. Not every comment deserves reply. Not every provocation deserves acknowledgement. Silence becomes self-respect enacted quietly. There is also humility in silence. It acknowledges that understanding does not always come from speaking. That growth requires listening to reality, not always correcting it. As silence becomes integrated, conversations gain weight. Words are placed intentionally, they land cleanly. Silence frames them, making them resonate longer. The presence cultivated through silence does not seek control overtly. It invites alignment. People come closer or move away without force. Both outcomes are accepted. Ultimately, silence reveals the self beneath reaction. It teaches patience with uncertainty, comfort with ambiguity, trust in sufficiency. And in that quiet alignment, influence becomes effortless. Not because silence dominates, but because it clarifies. Silence ceases to be something you use. It becomes something you are.